I want to tell you about a very specific kind of wrong. Not wrong you made a mistake and you know it immediately. Wrong like you're completely certain you're right. Because everything you're doing looks like the right move from where you're standing. That's what Crimson Desert did to me for a long time. 200 hours. And the worst part is that the game was never confusing. It was never inconsistent. It was never broken. And I know that sounds like the kind of vague, mystical thing people say when they want to defend a game they like. I get it. I would have rolled my eyes at that sentence at hour 40. So I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it. I'm going to show you exactly how it happened. Because the way I misread Crimson Desert is, I think, the way a lot of people misread it. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Here's where it starts. There is a very specific kind of confidence that comes from having played a lot of games in the genre. It feels like competence, it feels like experience. You see the opening cutscene, you recognize the shape of things. Big world, story as context, combat as a core. And your brain goes, okay, I know how this works. And you start playing, and for a while you're right. Or at least you're not wrong enough to notice. That was me. Day 1, I booted up Crimson Desert with somewhere around 4,000 combined hours across similar games. So I watched the opening, Cliff, the Greymans, War, Pyvel, Factions, Ancient Mystery, and I do my mental filling in about 30 seconds. Story, check. World, check. Combat, check. I know this game. I have played this game before. The combat feels incredible. You're chaining attacks together, mixing in elemental abilities, calling in support, and it all flows into these sequences that feel like conducting an orchestra of violence. It's spectacular, it's exactly what the trailers promised. I get it, I think to myself. Fast, expressive, spectacle combat, make big flashy combos, look amazing doing it, win. And here's where everything starts to go wrong, because that model works, not forever, but for long enough that I never question it. The game keeps giving me positive feedback. Enemies die, I feel competent. I feel like I understand exactly what's happening. And then, quietly, something shifts. And I don't notice, not yet. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. I kept hitting moments where what I was doing just didn't land the way it should. Something that had worked perfectly 10 encounters ago would stop working. I'd set up the same way, execute the same way, and get a completely different result. The encounter would punish me for something I couldn't immediately name. I'd die, try again, die again, and I did what any rational person does. I tried harder, more aggressive, faster, pushed through it, died, tried again. And here's the diagnosis I settled on. The design is inconsistent. And this is the embarrassing part, reviews kinda backed it up. Early critical consensus on Crimson Desert was pretty clear that the difficulty felt weird in places. Not the satisfying learn the pattern of Elden Ring, more like the rules kept shifting on you. So I felt validated, I had correctly identified a design flaw. Case closed. Except, what nobody was writing, and I was definitely not thinking, was that inconsistency might be in the players, not the fights. Because what I was actually doing, and I can see this so clearly now, is I had found an approach I liked and I was running it on everything, every encounter. And when the fight wasn't built around the rhythm of that approach, I called it unfair. When actually it was just a different fight, with different things in it. Actually no, that's not even the right way to put it. I was looking at them, I just wasn't seeing them. Because I'd already decided what I was going to do before I walked in. So my fix was to execute better, tighten everything up. Be faster and cleaner. Which is like being bad at chess and deciding the solution is to move faster. Then I decided the problem was the controls. And look, this one is complicated because the controls genuinely are unusual. Crimson Desert's input system asks a lot from a small number of buttons, mapping multiple actions to the same input and relying on context to decide what you meant. And when you're moving fast, the game keeps doing something slightly different than what you intended. You try to do one thing and you get another. You try to interact with the merchant and instead you just stole something from their table. But here's where it gets interesting. Pearl Abyss is not a studio that doesn't know what it's doing. These are the people who built and maintained Black Desert Online for over a decade. Weekly content updates. One of the most mechanically dense MMOs ever shipped. They built the Black Space engine from scratch, proprietary technology ground up, because they needed it to render a world the size of Pywell at a native 4K 60 FPS without the compression issues that would have come with the standard engines. They have been making games professionally for a very long time. You don't build a system like this by accident. So why does it feel like this? I didn't have an answer. For the first time, I was asking the right question, and that question was going to sit in the back of my head for another 50 hours before it finally cracked something open. Before I get there, and I promise we're getting there, I need to talk about something that took me embarrassingly long to reconsider. It's an MMO you play by yourself. That was the phrase. Early reviews, player threads, it kept coming up as a mild criticism. Like Crimson Desert hadn't quite shed its MMORPG skin. Like you could still feel the Black Desert Online DNA underneath everything. It's closer in scope to a live service game than a focused action adventure. I agreed with this. I was experiencing the MMO DNA as a problem. But here's what I want to ask you. And don't answer yet, just hold the question. What if MMO you play by yourself isn't a criticism? What if it's the entire point? Think about what MMOs actually get right. Not the grinding, not the monetization. The thing underneath all of that. Scope. The sense that the world is bigger than your ability to see all of it. The feeling that you're inhabiting something, not moving through something. Single player games, even great ones, usually trade this away for narrative clarity. You move through the story, the world is sized to the story. You finish, and the world finishes with you. Crimson Desert refuses to work like that. It keeps being larger than your ability to contain it. And if you're playing it like a single player game to be completed, which I was, that's going to feel like bloat. Like the game doesn't respect your time. Like there's too much stuff between you and the finish line. But what if there's no finish line? What if that's the design? I'll come back to this, because the answer, the real answer, is connected to something I hadn't figured out yet. So I tried the thing everyone tries when a game frustrates them. I changed my build. And I tried it, and it worked noticeably. Things that had felt arbitrary started feeling manageable. I was getting through the content I was stuck on. I cleared a stretch of the game I'd been banging against for days. There, I thought, that's the problem. Wrong setup, mystery solved. 3 days later, I was stuck again. Different zone, and this is the thing I kept not understanding. The thing that took embarrassingly long to land. Every time I changed my approach and it worked, I felt like I'd solved a puzzle. But the puzzle kept coming back. Different shape, same puzzle. A different build is still the same mistake. It's still assuming the problem is execution. It's still assuming that if I optimize my setup well enough, the game will open up. It's still playing at Crimson Desert instead of with it. I had gotten slightly better at the wrong thing. 3 separate times, and each time it felt like progress. And then the third approach stopped working, and I was tired, genuinely physically tired of the loop. And instead of immediately going back to the problem-solving mode, I did something I hadn't done in maybe 60 hours. I just stopped trying. I went riding. No destination, no quest marker, no optimization in mind. Just got on the horse and rode into a region I hadn't explored yet. Watching the world go by, because Pywell looks different from horseback than it does from a quest marker. And I think some part of my brain knew I needed a different angle on something I couldn't name yet. I found a cove. I thought there's probably fish here. I had the gear, I had nothing urgent. I sat down and fished. For 45 minutes I just fished. Caught things, listened to the ambient audio, water, wind, something distant I couldn't identify. Wasn't thinking about builds, wasn't thinking about bosses, wasn't optimizing toward anything. And I felt more relaxed than I had in 60 hours of playing Crimson Desert correctly. And then the thought came sideways, the way realizations do when you're not chasing them. What does it feel when it's actually working? And I realized, sitting by that cove, holding a fishing rod, that every time Crimson Desert had felt the way the trailers promised, it was because I stopped executing a plan and started reacting to a moment. Every time it had felt flat and frustrating, I'd been somewhere else in my head. The game was never asking for mastery over rotation, it was asking for presence. It was asking me to be in it instead of above it. And here's the part that cracked everything open. That's not just combat, that's everything. Here's what I mean by that. Pearl Abyss has talked in developer commentary and interviews about designing Pival with what they called intentional distractions. That phrase sounds almost dismissive when you first hear it, like they're admitting the world is full of filler. But that's not what it means. It means the world is built to pull you sideways from your objective, on purpose, constantly. There are places that don't appear on your map until you stumble into them. Ruins that look like backdrop until you walk close enough and realize they're actually something. A puzzle, a discovery, a reason to stop. There are sky islands, the abyss, the whole vertical layer of Pival floating above everything, that you can see from the ground for hours before you ever go up there, just hanging in the air, waiting. The faction reputation system is tracking choices you make in real time and shifting how entire regions treat you. None of this announces itself, none of this has a tutorial pop-up that says, hey, this matters. It just exists, it's just there. And if you're moving at optimizing speed, marker to marker, encounter to encounter, you will pass through all of it and register almost none of it. That's not a flaw in the design, that is the design. Pearl Abyss spent years building a world that resists being efficiently completed. They took inspiration from Sicily, actually went there, studied the architecture and landscape and the specific texture of a place that has accumulated centuries of history in its geography. And what they were after, I think, was the quality a real place has, the quality of existing beyond what you can see from the road, of rewarding you for wandering. That's what intentional distractions means. They're not distracting you from the game, they are the game. They're the game saying in its low language, slow down, look around. You're going to miss something good if you keep moving at this speed. And the combat is saying the same thing. And the wide range controls are saying the same thing. Be here. Stop being 3 steps ahead of yourself. The world is worth being present in. I had spent 100 hours moving too fast to hear any of it. After that clicked, things changed in the way I hadn't expected. Not just the game felt better. The specific texture of how I was spending time in Pival shifted completely. I started noticing the intentional distractions and actually following them, instead of filling them away for later. I'd see something off the path, a structure, a weird light, a detail that didn't quite fit the surrounding area, and instead of tagging it mentally and moving on, I'd go there, right then. Whatever the quest told me to do could wait. And almost every single time there was something there. Not always something dramatic, not always a revelation. Sometimes just more world. A piece of Pival I wouldn't have seen if I'd kept moving. But that turned out to be enough. I started going into fights differently. Not with a plan, with attention. Looking at the space first. Actually looking at it. And I kept finding that fights I'd experienced as punishing had a solution in the room. I'd just been too focused on my own approach to see it. I went into the abyss, the sky islands floating above Pival, and spent a stretch of hours up there that I didn't track because I wasn't tracking anything. And looking down at the continent from above literally made it feel different, like understanding a city after you climb to the roof of the tallest building and see how all the streets actually connect. None of this felt like discovering content I'd missed, it felt like finally hearing something that had been playing the whole time. And look, I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the video where it would have been very easy for me to slide into pure advocacy, into defending everything, into being the guy who spent 200 hours on something and needs it to have been worth it. So let me be honest about what the game actually is. Crimson Desert is not a masterpiece. I've sat with that question long enough to be sure I can't call it one. The story has a ceiling it hasn't break through. Cliff takes too long to become someone you feel for rather than just watch. He's as compelling as a physical presence for most of the game before he becomes compelling as a person. And by the time the emotional payoff arrives, the game has already spent goodwill it needed. The narrative beats are familiar. There are moments where you can feel the MMORPG skeleton underneath the single-player ambitions, where the story logic that works for an MMO, constant faction escalation, world-threatening states, starts to buckle slightly under the weight of a more intimate structure. The final chapters are rough. There's a difficulty spike that feels like it belongs to a different game. You come out of the other side of the main campaign feeling depleted when you should feel satisfied. Patches have improved this, but they haven't fixed it. Some quests are thin, not interestingly thin, just thin. The mechanical variety that's there, different quest structures, different engagement types, can feel like it was included to break up the pattern rather than because it had anything specific to say. These are not misread design, these are actual flaws, and I want to name them clearly, because I spent too long unable to see them clearly. When I was fighting the game's language, everything blurred together into one frustration. But, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, I was getting a worse version of both of the good parts and the bad parts for the first 100 hours. The real flaws were there, so was the extraordinary stuff. I just couldn't see either one accurately because I was playing from the wrong position. The moment you stop fighting the game's language is the moment you can actually evaluate it honestly. And from that position, what Crimson Desert is, genuinely without inflation, is one of the most ambitious single things Pearl Abyss has ever built. A studio with a decade of MMORPG trying to make something that inhabits a completely different space. And mostly succeeding. Imperfectly, frustratingly, unmistakably succeeding at something I've never quite experienced before. Flawed game, extraordinary world, genuinely unlike anything else. 200 hours. The solution was always in the room. The world was always asking me to slow down. The controls were always asking me to be present. The game was always speaking clearly. If you are somewhere in the middle of Crimson Desert right now, frustrated, confused, hitting the same wall for the 8th time, wondering if the problem is the game or you or some combination, I'm not going to tell you to go fishing. That's too cute and you'll hate it. Here's what I tell you instead. The thing you think is the problem almost certainly is not the problem. The problem is that you walked in fluent in a different language and the game isn't going to translate itself for you. It's not built to. It was built to reward you for learning to read it. And that reward is real. It's one of the best feelings I've had playing a game in years. Of finally hearing something that was always there. Of walking into a room and actually seeing what's in it. But here's the part I didn't expect. The part I'm still sitting with. 200 hours in and I still haven't seen all of it. There are faction reputation arcs I never completed. Parts of the Abyss I haven't been to. Systems I brushed against once and moved on from that I know how more inside them than I reached. And I don't feel bad about that. I don't know when that happened. Somewhere in the second 100 hours, I stopped trying to finish Crimson Desert and started just being in it. I'm not sure that's a lesson. I'm not sure it generalizes. It might just be what 200 hours does to a person. But I'm still playing.